then our club has to represent the world as we see it. And not just in terms of how people look, but also how people describe the earth and the sky and just about everything in science. So how did we choose the EC 50 honorees? 50 people who are changing the world that the world needs to know about. The first thing Joe Rohde said to me was that if you take a problem and you approach it with the same people, you're always going to get the same type of result. So he immediately said we wanted as diverse a judging panel, people who could look at the world through a different narrative and lens and be able to come together with some sort of conclusion. So he put together a group that was from all over the world. The next thing we had to do is have our membership give us people that they have met along the way that were doing incredible things that maybe weren't recognized for their work. We got about 450 nominations, and I have to tell you, they were pretty amazing. We could have gotten an EC 200 out of it. We came out with our top 50 honorees, and the result was nothing less than spectacular. We have people covering all sectors of disciplines from space to paleontology, oceanography. We have Inuit, Native Americans, Sri Lankans, Indians, Africans, and just across the border. But in the meantime, I want you to sit back and enjoy some good old-fashioned storytelling.
Small communities in far eastern Yucatan have been poorly investigated, given to their isolation and distance from modern cities. However, these communities have the remains of long-time occupation since pre-Hispanic times all over to historical times and modern times. Ancient buildings covering the landscape are distributed all over these cities, showing evidence of their great occupation in other times. These communities were actually settled nearby natural resources like water and agricultural lands to cultivate over extensive ways. Cenotes are distributed all over the area. This body of water provide different resources for the people living in these communities, even today. But the most important is probably the fact that surrounding these communities there is a great amount of cultivable land divided in different patches in the landscape. These soils rich in nutrients were probably the places where cultivation was intensively and extensively practiced in order to provide agricultural resources to main cities located in the area. Cities like Chichen Itza, Ekbalan, Juluba, Cobá developed in the area, most of these cities having even more than 70,000 or 80,000 people. People who need agricultural resources to survive. In these areas, isolated in eastern Yucatan nowadays, was where this production was conducted. Sometimes soil resources in this area are hidden because the green carpet you can see cover all possibilities to do this investigation. However, when these lands are burned for Sweden cultivation, you can see these differences in the landscape and make important studies to contribute to more knowledge about ancient Maya production. Hello, my name is Iván Batún. I am an archaeologist investigator in Universidad de Oriente in Valladolid, Yucatan. I'm happy to be working in this part of the state of Yucatan because I can focus on what I like. This landscape is actually covered by different features where the ancient maize were cultivated, all the agricultural that support the construction of the main sites nearby, like Chichen Itza, Ekbalan, Culuba, or Coba. In these areas that look like sinkholes, you can have deposit of soils, rich soil that can go over 2 meters deep, making a great areas for cultivation that otherwise you only find a very stony soil above these features. These features, known today as rejolladas, were actually modified by the ancient Mayas. They construct walls like this, you can see, in a manner of terraces, separating the different cultivation areas and helping for the accumulation of soil, but also retaining waters when the storms and the rainy season was happening. So these areas and the cultivation doing there were very well protected. And you can see most of these sinkholes, some of them about 200 meters and a meter diameter under this kind of cultivation. Usually on the top of these sinkholes you can see the remains of ancient domestic structures. So these are elevations at the edge of the rejolladas. You can see artifacts indicating how much activity was conducted in these parts of the landscape. So the entire landscape in this area may be seen dotted by these features and the segregation of different parts of soils. Also, it's very important to understand that these large extensions of land were demonstrate the way the ancient Mayas were living before Spanish colonization. In a dotted landscape, they work living together the mosaic of different patches of cultivation soil, having the opportunity to produce in an extensive way the agriculture that sustain the main cities of the Yucatan. Again, my name is Iván Batún, and I am very happy to work in this area, not only discovering the ancient techniques we support the ancient Maya cities, but also working with modern campesinos in the area to know how have been they affected nowadays with the global warming who is affecting the entire world. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Dr. George Bay, and I'm pleased to be with you today as one of the members of the Explorers Club 50 under the category of Seekers. I think that's appropriate for me. As an archaeologist, I've spent my career seeking evidence on the rise and fall of ancient Maya civilization, and more recently on the ways in which archaeology can work together with conservation and cultural heritage in order to help preserve and support them. I work in the northern Maya lowlands of Yucatan. I began my career at Ekbalam, and for the last couple of decades, I've been over in that gray area there, the Puc, focusing to a large extent on the region around the archaeological site of Kiwik. Kiwik is an archaeological site that has formed the basis for the creation of an international nonprofit organization called Kashil Kiwik, which is dedicated to preserving the archaeology, biological, and cultural heritage of the Puc region. Physically, it consists of some 4,500 acres of dry tropical forest, which surrounds the site of Kiwik, although we call ourselves a reserve without boundaries. In the middle of Kashil Kiwik, the biocultural reserve is the Maya site of Kiwik. Kashil Kiwik has purchased the site and then donated it to the National Institute of Anthropology and History of Mexico. And together we work to excavate and manage the site. Here are my two co-directors, Dr. William Ringel from Davidson College and Tomas Gaireta Negron, a member of the National Institute of Anthropology and History. I'm presently working on the later and large palace at Kiwik, dating from around 700 to 1000 AD. My efforts the last couple of years have been on the excavation of what we think was the actual throne room of the palace. And here you can see some slides of our efforts from last summer. Here is what the throne room looked like at the beginning of the field season. And here's what it looked like when we ended our field season for 2022. We'll be back again next year. Besides working at Kiwik, we've expanded our research area over, as I said, as a reserve without boundaries. We're looking at some 350 square kilometers of the area now, and this has been undertaken largely with the assistance of LIDAR, which we have used to discover thousands of platforms, hundreds of new sites. On the left, you can see the region with some of the major sites laid out in the triangles, and on the right, you can actually see all of the features or archaeological remains which we have discovered via the LIDAR, which represents thousands of new platforms. The intensity of occupation before the collapse was ginormous. And LIDAR gives us very detailed images of the landscape underneath the tropical canopy. Here's a LIDAR image of the site of Kiwik within the Biocultural Reserve, showing the site center and including the building we're working on now, which is the throne room, which you can see that red arrow directing you to. Now, as I said, Kiwik is an archaeological site that kind of frames our nonprofit's biocultural reserve, and that represents that 4,500 acres that we manage. Here's a view of the biocultural reserve. The forest is beautiful, and in the center, where that hill is popping up, is the site of Kiwik. And underneath the red trees, the flamboyants, is our research and learning center where we live and work. The site is wonderfully preserved, and through a relationship between managing forest and archaeological remains, they each support one another. We don't want to damage the forest by overdoing it with tourism, and we don't want to damage the site by destroying the forest. Within the reserve, we've built an off-the-grid research and learning center. This allows us to live and work within the forest. This is an off-the-grid, meaning that it's solar-powered, wet water waste management. The only thing we bring in is a tank of propane for the stove. Everything else is biodegradable, all the materials that we have as well. So we try and leave as little an imprint on the reserve as possible, even when living and working there. I work with Millsaps College, which has been one of our major supporters, and it's been transformational for the college. We've been able to engage just about every department at Millsaps in this large program, from anthropology, of course, all the way through mathematics and religious studies. So it's been wonderful to see how the Biocultural Reserve has served as a spark for so many research and teaching programs. Besides Millsaps, of course, over the last couple of decades, as the word has gotten out, we have served as a base of operations for dozens of classes and programs from colleges around the United States and Mexico. Now, the reserve itself is recognized as containing one of the best preserved areas of dry tropical forest, which is very endangered. The wetlands people care about, the rainforest people care about, but people have tended to neglect the dry tropical forest. So we are at the tip of the spear in terms of research and learning and conservation of the biology of Yucatan. As part of our reserve, we support a full-time staff, which includes a reserve director to manage day-to-day operations, James Callahan, and a biological educator, Ricardo Pasos. They direct and oversee a group of rangers and caretakers that are involved in everything from fire management, poaching, through day-to-day education of communities and colleges and universities. One of the programs we're really excited about and have been expanding on is our jaguar conservation program. As it became apparent that the reserve is the home, or at least temporary homes, for jaguars and 3 other species of cats, we focused an increasing amount of attention on trying to educate and monitor and conserve the jaguar populations in this region. They are highly endangered, and we hope to continue this program over the coming years. We also support a high school scholarship program for rural youth out in these small communities where there are no high schools. Typically, the students would stop their education at middle school. And we also run a Maya language visitation program for the Maya communities around us. Maya people oftentimes have never seen their heritage. Many of these communities do not speak Spanish, so we work with our local workers in order to bring them to the site and show them, get them involved in conversations, which is fascinating and fruitful in their own language. In the middle is a recent picture of Daniel Martin, one of our high school students who has now gone on to technological school. He's a business student, 3rd year college student. So we're really proud of what Danielle's doing and working with us. Some of the other things that have emerged out of this kind of seeking of new ways to explore the relationship between archaeology, biology, and cultural heritage is a seed bank and nursery. The surrounding region has experienced dramatic deforestation for a variety of reasons, both from poor farm management through the needs for firewood. These communities primarily subsist on cooking and heating their homes with firewood. And so we've encouraged education for deforestation issues, and we also have developed with the UN Small Grants Program a nursery where we provide free of charge communities with plants and trees to reforest their own lands. We also manage a seed bank. 2 of the really interesting new things that we have explored in the last couple years. One has been the development of a library that allows for researchers and students to explore Maya culture and heritage, archaeological and cultural, also not just through books, but through digital resources. And we've been fortunate enough to bring on Dr. Hannah Rutledge, who is our director. And she is the director of the Biomedical Library at the University of Pennsylvania. Her interest is in both library and informational management technology, but also has really made us aware of the potential of the library to serve communities through medical literacy and through community service. So what started as a minor component, having some books for the Maya, has turned into a really exciting new program for us to work with children and adults and the various agencies around the region as regards health and health literacy. And then finally, I think, not surprisingly, perhaps, and during the pandemic, our attention has become highly focused on disease and health. And so we've connected with Alan Penman of the University of Mississippi Medical Center, director of their public health program, and Carlos Ibarra, who is a professor in the university system in Yucatan, who focuses on infectious disease. And together, they are putting together a public health program, both for research, learning, and education. Carlos and Alan are working on issues of infectious transmission of diseases like Chagas, which is particularly problematic out in the countryside, but also working with rural health clinics, both for education and support, and with local healers, such as you can see in this photograph, one of the famous bone doctors from the nearby community of Yasha Chen. So in conclusion, then, I think that, again, this is appropriate for me to be with the seekers. I've been seeking not only how to do the studies of the past, but also how to seek new ways in order to support the biology and the cultural heritage and present-day cultural issues that face the Maya communities. And so I'm really proud to have that opportunity to share some of this with you. So thank you so much.
I'm Alicia Colson. I'm a seeker, an archaeologist and ethnohistorian. I've been fascinated by images as sources of information since I was a little girl living on the shores of a lagoon in an archipelago in Santa Catarina, southern Brazil. It was there that I realized that images often carried far more information than text. They were far more powerful. I noticed that those who couldn't read text understood images. Images, like any other form of evidence, data, gathered by archaeologists and ethnohistorians, must be analysed using intellectual frameworks called theory. This data is gathered so that we, I mean researchers, can ask those pesky W questions, the how, when, why, and what. These intellectual frameworks serve to organise the series of questions we ask of every image and everything else in archaeology and ethnohistory. This admittedly complex graphic indicates that each theory used today was influenced by the specific time period, the context in which it was developed. It's also wise to remember that we're really looking at a tiny portion of the past. The rest has disappeared. What remains might be there because of a fluke. So, since I'm interested in images, for my doctoral research I undertook 3 months of fieldwork in the Lake of the Woods, the region in the yellow box, in northwestern Ontario, Canada. I chose this region as it lies on the edge of the Canadian Shield, a granitic formation, and features pictograph sites, places where paintings have been identified, some of which have been examined for almost 150 years. My wider experience urged me to step away from the received views and get back to the pesky how, why, when, and what, to think differently. Frameworks, intellectual approaches, define the range and type of data to be used. This means that interpretations, understandings, and conclusions are limited by how each approach defines data. These pictograph sites are archaeological sites, vertical, not horizontal. I applied a sequence of the intellectual frameworks generally available to archaeologists. The most fashionable, known as the post-processual approach, turned out to be problematic. I used computing technology to handle the textual and image data from the sites. I applied pattern matching to detect whether it might be possible to find combinatory rules that might shed some light on the purpose of the images. That there must be a purpose to them was assumed by everyone adopting the post-processual approach. No such patterns came to light. For all we know, the paintings might have just said Kilroy was here. This is fascinating. An examination of the photographs and field notes of previous researchers revealed that the frameworks that they had employed drove the conclusions they reached. Nobody noticed Kilroy, but the paintings were exactly the same. I realized that as an archaeologist, I couldn't conclude much about the combinatory rules of the images or why specific places were chosen as sites, as I'd found even more sites and even more paintings. Something needed to shift. That the sites play an important role in the lives of the original inhabitants, it was widely accepted, and that they probably play a role in the lives of today's inhabitants is important, providing a real clue. That raises a challenge. So far, the worldview of the outsider, i.e. the non-indigenous world, takes precedence. The framework adopted by the archaeologist, with a capital A, has profoundly influenced the ways in which the data from the sites has been organized and interpreted. But only Kilroy shows up. Fun, yes, but something, probably a great deal, is being lost. This and my other research projects causes me to argue that we have to think very carefully about the way in which we tackle images, not just those that we see on every billboard, but especially those created by others who do not share our worldview and who are open to engage with us so as to expose their views for explication. Over 18 months ago, I was extremely fortunate to receive an invitation from a knowledge keeper to work with him in his teaching circle so that we might explain Anishinaabe Eshigewin as practiced by the Laxaw First Nation, a practice which outsiders call animism. To open the discussion, we present two worldviews. The outsiders is the worldview of the archaeologist and the ethnohistorian, and the insiders is of those who created the images and those who are Anishinaabe. For the knowledge keeper from the Laxaw First Nation, the rock paintings occur in the space where the non-physical and the physical worlds meet. Though often labelled as art by Eurocentric outsiders, these images are not art. Our task begins. As we unleash the insider world, we will begin to understand more of our own insider one. Not simply to understand the images created, used, and in Laxaw, but something far more ambitious, to understand how this other world worldview works, what value is placed on the landscape, the land, the larger world, the water origins. Outsiders can understand the ways in which the peoples value our living planet. One thing is for sure, there is far much more to the paintings than Kilroy was here.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Juan Martinez Pineda, one of the first Explorer Club's 50, and excited to be here with you all today. Excited for you all at home to experience the magic and the power of this group called the Seekers, those who are making connections with archaeology and advocating for those communities that are so important to maintaining those connections alive today. So, without further ado, I'm going to ask each one of you to dive right into this conversation. I want to really make the most of our time together. And I'll start with you, Alicia. What does a normal day look like? Not normal, because there's no such thing as normal. What is a typical day in the field look like for you?
Well, for me, it would be, usually I've spent a couple of months beforehand planning. So ideally, I would say, okay, I know, I'd like to spend this amount of time doing this. So it's but I'm aware that actually I may have to throw that actually out the window, sort of as in, because I'm talking to people. And so I'm working in Northwestern Ontario. That means I'm going to presume I've already arrived. I've taken, I've flown there, I've driven, so like 3.5 hours, I'm there, and so it's the first day of field. So I would have already found out what are people thinking, where sites might be. I've read the ethnohistorical literature. I have built some predictive models to work out where's a site likely to be. So you obviously want to ask questions, but I also know that I won't be able to ask a direct question much as I would be able to ask my colleagues in the lab a direct question. So it's a case of listening. And I'm likely to sit there and listen and drink cups of tea. And I will find eventually, probably after hearing the same information 3 times over, but each time I will get a little bit more information. And so I have to wait. And sometimes it's a waiting game. And it's recognition that actually I'm dealing with another worldview, another way of doing things. And then I have to say, okay, well, when I have some information, I may go with the people, go there myself. But then when I'm going to record the site, I know it could take, so we're talking about something on a cliff site, on a granite, so you think I'll describe the landscape briefly. It's granite shield, it's immediately beside water, so I'm going to be in a canoe or a boat. So I have to know how to record a site from the boat, which means having all my equipment in a bag, and I'll probably tip it up and tip it upside down and have everything on the base of the boat, and I'll be recording. So I'll do photography. I'll use a classic a form, and I'll make as many measurements as I can, and knowing that I'll probably take a day and a half to record somewhere, and that will include photography and digital images and sort of film images and written descriptions. But that's only sort of, so that will fulfill the sort of archaeological side. But at the same time, I realize because I'm talking to people, I have to listen to what people have to say, because it won't be, I have to realize this is part of a larger worldview. It's not just, I've got to remember that and continually put my hat sort of ethno-history hat on and realize I'm actually talking to people. This is part of their world. This is not my world. And I've got to remember I can't impose my world on their world, even though the temptation, I think, as an archaeologist is to get some, I want to know the answer. I have to sort of rein myself in.
Ivan, what does a typical day look like for you in the field?
Well, I have been conducting archaeological projects in Eastern Yucatan for the last 10 years. And last summer, we have a great, field season. And basically, we live in small communities where we doing research. We stay in a little community. It's named Tacabo. It's a really small community of Maya-speaking people. And I make this a very good cultural experience because we have a number of students coming from the University of Valladolid, which is a town not too far from there. And all my students are Maya speakers from communities around the area. But we also have a number of students from University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, where I'm an adjunct professor too. And we have this intercultural experience because my students are actually learning a little bit of English, and American students are a little bit of Maya. And the meanwhile, we go into the field and do basically survey, excavation, and do all the archaeological endeavors during the day. But in the afternoon and night, we are basically interacting for the people. And this past season, we made some ethnographic research too. And we were basically interviewing mother campesinos, trying to understand how they use the land. We're trying to understand the archaeological past by surveying the land, excavating the land, doing soil profiles. But we learn a lot of how, just the mother campesinos is still conducting agricultural endeavors over there.
George, you get to work nearby with Ivan as well too. Does your day look like a typical day like Ivan, or what
well,
does your day look like?
It's a little different. His day sounds pretty great, actually, and what he's doing is pretty great. We're over in a few hours away from Ivan in the Puc region, and we live in a community of about 40,000 individuals called Oshkuz Kab, and they're mostly Maya speakers as well. And my day, we have a camp there, and then we have an off-the-grid camp out at the reserve. So my day will include both working with different projects and programs in Oshkosh, and then going out to the reserve and working at the archaeological site there. And so, again, we've been working at Kiwik for several decades now. And so we're a very well-oiled machine on a good day, with lots of local Maya guys that have decades of experience excavating and working with us. And we also bring students from Mexico and the United States down to learn with and from the teams that we have. And so Kiwik is a large Maya city, not the largest, but it's substantial. And so we're presently involved in some major architectural work on structures there. So I'll go out there and make sure everything is working properly. I have an amazing team. I try and stay out of people's way and make sure they can get their work done, the people who are actually working out there on a day-to-day basis. And then I'll probably stop off at the camp to touch base with the reserve director and see what kind of programming we're doing. So on any given day, we might be giving out free plants and trees to local communities as a part of a reforestation project that we're doing with the United Nations Small Grants Program. And working in town, going back to town after I make sure things are okay on any given day out there and then back. You'll usually have a couple of other projects going on with faculty from other colleges and universities, American and Mexican, that I'll touch base with, and then working on the kinds of things that we do in Oshkosh. So for example, we just completed building a library at our facility, and we were really excited about that. So it might mean I have to meet with the architects. It might mean talking to the donors, learning how to get books from the United States shipped down to Mexico, talking to our new librarian, and then visiting the laboratory and finding out how everybody's doing with the material we're bringing in. So my day is really kind of like running a strange business that includes everything from working with local communities out at the reserve, through running archaeological projects, through trying to figure out what we could do to advance our thinking about things like community interaction and community development, things like that.
That sounds like you're running not just a business, but it sounds like you're running a little city almost in a way. And
it's very good thought.
It is, I love the connection to community and how everything that you're doing is to support, help, amplify, and center the community that you're there visiting as well too. So
yeah, we're there. Ivan is a Yucatecan, he is a Mayan, and he lives in his community and gives to so many different ways. And in our case, we're a stakeholder in Oshkosh and out in the Pook. So we're also there for the long haul. So sometimes we do things correctly, sometimes we make mistakes, but with the people we're working with, they know that we're going to be there listening and trying to do a better job with the people we work with.
Alicia, one of the things that we're talking about, and one of the reasons why the Explorers Club 50 is a thing, it is a living dream, is because we are trying to inspire the next generation of exploration and explorers. We're considered, because we're the next generation of explorers, but there's younger people coming right next to us. What's your hope? What's your vision for that new generation of explorers? I think especially with you as a woman in this field, like, we need more of you. So what is your hope for that vision, that dream of exploration and explorers?
Yeah, this has got me thinking back to it's a good question. I think we have to start thinking about what worldviews do we have, and the fact that we have all of us, first of all, have slightly different worldviews reflecting where we're from, what languages we speak. And I think when we are thinking about exploration, I think we have to try, which is really hard, try and work how is another person's worldview function, and and experience it, not just teach it, and recognize that within that you've got to have diversity. You have all these different people see things in different ways, and often this is implicit. And try as best as possible to see how can we make that explicit, and that there's a multitude of interpretations of one thing. And so it's sort of, I think it's actually really tough. I think it's a tough message to sort of think about how do we explore in the future, because some people will see people say, well, exploring, you mean, going out there to sort of the old colonial 19th century stuff. Well, it's not that. It's actually saying, okay, we have to understand how everyone thinks in this. How do we think? How do we organize our world? And so for me, it's saying, well, I really need to understand animism, to understand, but it's not just learn about it, but experience it. So I think if we're going to inspire future people, we have to be future explorers. We have to say, if you want to learn how another group is thinking, learn the language. Don't immerse yourself entirely. I mean, if I can say it, but then I'm going to give example of myself. I learned how to speak Brazilian. I went to school there. I used to think I was Brazilian until I came back to England as a kid and had to learn English, and suddenly realized that the world is organized entirely differently. You have more ways of talking about colors in Brazilian than you can in English. So it sort of made me realize, if you're going to explore another world, you have to immerse yourself, not just learn about it, because you can learn about it in the classroom, but it doesn't. For example, you can say, oh, I learned French. I can understand how the French function. But you can't really. You might be able to say, yeah, I'd like to have a baguette with some bread or something fairly easy, but it's so for the explorers of the future, I think we have to recognize we have to push ourselves beyond places that we may feel uncomfortable with, and perhaps even sort of have a conversation with ourselves. I think we have to be reflective and push ourselves to places that we may not want to go, and start realizing, okay, I'm really not comfortable, but why am I not comfortable? Is it because I am actually challenging what I thought my preconceived ideas? So, and that's what I think, that's really what I think exploration is going to be, because we're not going to be able to find another sea or a deeper ocean or a higher mountain, because we've already more or less mapped the physical stuff. So I think we're now talking about worldviews and trying to put ourselves in the boots, for want of a better word, the feet. Of course, we're never going to get it 100%, but that, we have to recognize that. But the same, we have to still do our best.
George, what do you think about the future of exploration? How are you feeling about it?
I love what Alicia's saying. And I think that the same sort of thing, maybe a different angle, which is exploration for the future. Teaching young people about exploration is not to say that they can't find new sorts of things, but that really isn't the major point, I think, for exploration. I think part of what we're doing here with the Explorers Club is redefining exploration and what it can mean. And so for me, and for what I'd like to share with these young explorers, is that exploration is about figuring out how what you're doing, whether it's archaeology or something else, in a broader set of contexts and situations, so that you're not just focusing on science, for example, but you're focusing on ideas about how what you do, whether it's archaeology or something else, how it can work with other things to create more opportunities, more possibilities to shape and change the world that these people are going to occupy. I think that if you can get your head around the idea that exploration can be in the mind, like Alicia is saying, or by spreading out in creating new connections and relationships and possibilities that change the cultural and social and environmental landscape, that it is just as powerful as the old ideas, but I think probably more useful for us today.
Ivan, I'm interested to hear your perspective about where you think the future of exploration, especially as someone that's rooted indigenous in your community and in your space. Like, what does exploration mean to you, and what does it look like for the future?
What exploration means to me, it's a way of exploring, but not just the unknown, territory. Basically, trying to know and to find a better way of life for people in my area. I mean, the well-being, and is basically because I think most of the knowledge of my people was misunderstood with early colonization, and so it was hidden. And we need to still to find those knowledge. I can give you a very good example of what I mean. I mean, with archaeology, we are working now on a small community, but this small community was the producing area for the big cities. And the community I'm working now doing archaeology is basically surrounded by just a big archaeological sites, like the most known is Chichen Itza, but then it's Ekbalen, Joba, and those areas have, I mean, those cities have a population around the, 50 to 100,000 people living during the classic and post-classic times. In order to these cities to be existing, we need the production area, the agricultors who feed that cities.
Right.
And those areas where we're working, we're trying to figure out what happened with the ancient techniques for agriculture. That's what we're exploring. Because on those times, they were able to support all big cities. Nowadays, they are not even self-subsistence.
Mm.
And most of the people living in that area is in poverty. More of almost 75 of the people living in that area is in poverty. They don't even produce. Even having the land, they don't produce what they produced in the past. So where are the ancient techniques? What can we do? How can we deal with climate change now, which is also affecting the agricultural production in the area? I mean, that's some of the questions and the things we want to explore. And I invite the young people that we can do it. We can nowadays. I think we have the chance of getting education, involved in exploration of this kind, and actually trying to recover those ancient knowledge. So I think above all that the students in the area, Maya students, can do that. I invite them to do that.
Oh, that is so powerful. The idea that this indigenous knowledge can also be relevant today. How do we continue to feed major cities, and what's the role of agriculture in that? Same thing that we're trying, some of the same questions that we have today are the same questions that they had, our ancestors, our indigenous cousins and family members in any part of the world probably face the same kind of question at some point.
I mean, we were able to do it in the past, in the same line, probably with less technology.
Yeah.
But, I mean, they did it. They did it. So, what is happening today?
And I mean, and we're all archaeologists or study culture here as well too. And I think about some of our colleagues and fellow explorers look to the sky and look to space. And I think about how much of exploration happened within the context of what we all work in, and how much archaeological evidence is present today that tells us what some of the truth is up there now. And this was very present way back in those days, right? I'm going a bit off on a tandem here because everyone always talks about the astronauts in the space, but I want to highlight that some of the secrets of space and sky were here thousands of years ago, and many of you probably know some of that. So wondering if you could invite any of that thought in how did space show up in your field? What are some of the signs that our ancestors were already aware of that science?
Yeah, well, the Maya were very sophisticated in terms of archaeoastronomy and great sky watchers. They built observatories, even as early as what we call the pre-classic period, but hundreds of years before the Common Era. They were setting up things called E-groups to monitor the passage of the sun. And by the classic period, they were monitoring a great number of stars, Venus, Mars, and other places. They had a very sophisticated understanding of the solar and lunar episodes. They predicted solar eclipses and lunar eclipses in their writings right on up through till today. So they had great depth of understanding. And alluding back to something that Ivan said, that understanding of astronomical knowledge was necessary for them to know when to plant, when to harvest. It provided a lot of important information for the success of their political units. And it's a great statement about them that this knowledge was able to sustain them successfully for thousands of years, as Ivan has said, that they were more productive and more successful in so many ways, the Maya people, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, than the challenges that they're facing today. So coming back to that, that understanding of the sky and of space was crucial to their religion and to their politics and to their annual cycles of agricultural production and distribution.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that, George. The Explorers Club 50 is an initiative to also diversify and invite innovation and collaboration across the Explorers Club. How do you think we can do a better job as an Explorers community about inviting that inclusion and that collaboration out there?
Okay, I think, well, I've always been involved. I was actually, so when I started training as an archaeologist, there was always somebody in the team who was considered, I started training in Canada and the UK. So in Canada, the guy who was my boss, who was the regional archaeologist, said, we always have someone who's a potential dropout from high school. This person, felt that they weren't going to achieve for some reason or another. And so our job, as even the person who was the most junior, was to essentially help, explain what we were doing, why we were doing it, what we were trying to understand. So as we learned, it didn't matter what position we had in the archaeological day. And in the survey, if we were surveying for archaeological sites in different parts, was to work with that person. And they were part of the team. And later on, when I did other surveys, I often worked with, it was women and Indigenous people. That was who were part of the team. And so we learned from each other and realized that I think now I would actually call it citizen science techniques. So those were the techniques that we were actually using, and we're learning how to map, how to think about the landscape, what were the plants that were there. And I remember one colleague of mine, he was from one of the Indigenous First Nations communities. He taught me how to identify plants. How do you process them? For example, rock tripe, it grows on the surface of the granite rock. It looks gray. When you touch it, it's very rough, and it looks, you can rip it somewhat like paper, but it's called, and you can actually, if you take a pen, you could write on it, and but it's actually survival food. So if you are stuck and you lose everything, or for example, your canoe tips and or the food sort of goes to the bottom of the lake or something, you can actually boil rock chart and you boil it for 8 hours or 12 hours, and then you boil it several episodes, and then you can eventually eat it. It's not very tasty, having tried it, but you know, it's edible, it's food. And so we learned about when do you pick berries and how do you process the berries, and this is sort of it. And I did things like berry picking in the middle of the, and things that, so you know, this whole process was everyone was pulled in. So it was in a context where we were doing archaeology, but actually we were learning about each other's groups, and people were coming from different backgrounds, and so yeah, it was incredibly diverse. It was actually it was fun. It was fun, and I felt as though I was actually learning about how we lived and how we could work with each other. Rather, it wasn't the sort of, I felt that doing archaeology in Britain was a bit clinical, because I was there to find the past, whereas when I was doing field work in that technique, I was actually learning not just about the past but the present and how traditions carried on. So we learned, you know, how to, and it was beadwork and why certain images appeared in beadwork. So it was round. It was sort of like, yeah, it was fun actually. But I came out feeling as though I had actually taught people and I had learned at the same time. So there's an exchange of ideas and techniques and methods.
Ivan, what does inclusion collaboration look like for you? What are some of your hopes there? Yeah, especially because you are working with young students that are Maya from the local community, from there. Like, what does that mean for them and for you?
Well, when colonizers arrived to the Yucatan in the 16th century, the Mayas already put together a lot of knowledge that they have their books, they have been reading books. However, I mean, colonizers didn't understand that and thought there was devil things. So in the meanwhile, most of that knowledge was lost. So nowadays, I mean, working in archaeology and trying to understand many things, even some developments and understanding what is registered in those books, I mean, we are discovering that a lot of natural knowledge and, you know, astronomical knowledge is registered there. So we still did some collaboration with, you know, astronomers, biologists, to understand how these things works together. And I mean, by focusing in agricultural production, as George mentioned, I mean, we have been discovering how Mayas understand in the past pretty well how the moon cycles are connected with agriculture. So some of that knowledge is still preserved in some Maya people, but I mean, some have been also lost. And the reason is because the assimilation has been trying to erase that knowledge, you know, and some of those people don't even have, formal education. So most of that knowledge is lost, and still we have a lot to recover, and we can do it by collaboration. I mean, as an example, I'm trying to understand nowadays, I mean, how agriculture and beekeeping works together. That's some of the things I'm investigating. And I mean, for sure, because it's even in the ancient Maya books, is registered some of these, I mean, understanding of beekeeping and agriculture. It's already there. We don't understand it all nowadays, but we know that they use it. And this has this very symbiotic thing people is even using today. I mean, for pollination example, they move the beekeeping for get a good pollination, get a good harvest, and get a good production. It's something that's not even used today. But is there the archaeological evidences have been found? He did that lot. I mean, landscape having this combination of agricultural production and beekeeping. Very long landscapes, I mean, kilometers and kilometers in the eastern coast of the Yucatan were developed in this way to put it together. I mean, but nowadays it's not used. And even the production have been changed because, I mean, in most of the Yucatan, the production of beekeeping is on the European beach. and all native bees have been living in a site because it's not very commercial. But it's not very commercial. They produce a little less honey than. However, I mean, the other things they help to, in this case, thinking in agriculture.
Like that invitation to collaborate across disciplines. You know, we need the biologists, we need the astronomers, we need the agriculture, horticulture community to like help understand this and also acknowledge that there is a lot of knowledge lost, and it was systemic, it was purposeful, but now we find ourselves that, hey, there was a lot there that we actually need, and we're just now resurfacing some of those lessons learned that we could have benefited a long time ago from, right?
Make it official also, because one of the problems in trying to implement new agricultural ways, I mean, by a governmental issue, they always try to, I mean, to improve agriculture, but they don't make official some ancient knowledge, like try to bring some new plants in the area, which people don't know. I mean, they is not familiar with the ecology, and they don't understand when and how to be planted. I mean, people use the milpa with a huge of cultivation in it, and there are different days depending on the moon when you can plant either corn or, I mean, tubers have to be planted in certain season, and how they have to be cut also is very related with moon cycles.
Wow.
And I mean, when you come with new cultivation programs sponsored by the government and you don't use this because it's not official knowledge, I mean, you mess it up.
George, what does how do you want to invite more people to exploration? How do we make this space more collaborative, more diverse?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of room to make it more collaborative, more diverse, and more inclusive. It's not like we're anywhere close to achieving what we can achieve. So, for example, I think we need to create places and opportunities for groups that normally are not encouraged to participate in projects, or people who are afraid. So I'm kind of looking at it from the opposite side. We could talk a lot about the Maya people and everything we've done with them, but coming from Mississippi and working with people in the South, trying them to expand their worldview, trying to get students to be willing to go out and spend 2 or 3 months living off the grid with local communities. That is part of the package, I think, for creating people who, regardless of what they're going to do, are going to be better citizens, are going to be more open to the world that's around them, and also making it possible for some people, so people with disabilities, for example, that are normally not encouraged to go out in the field or not do these sorts of things, that we've tried to do that and make it possible for people who oftentimes are told, no, you're going in the field is not a good idea for you, that we would like to, I would like to see more of that, actually. And also people of color that are not, go to an archaeological convention like the SAAs and see how many people of color are actually there at that convention versus how many white people in America are, Americans at the SAAs, for example. So there's a lot of room for trying to make archaeology exciting, acceptable, and inclusive for them, which also means trying to help their families understand where they fit in, how it's possible for their son or daughter to have a career or opportunities like that. So there's so much that we can do, and that's just talking about, as I'm thinking about the sorts of students that we bring on board, that it needs to be really more explicit, more focused in terms of trying to do those sorts of things instead of just hoping that they happen.
All right, we're winding down, and I'm going to end it with this last question. It's a two-part question. One of them is, what is your advice to the future generation of explorers? And then, what is one of the best things you've ever eaten? Because I love food. I think food is a convener. It brings people together. What is one of your favorite dishes? And what is your advice to young explorers out there?
The best thing I ever eaten actually has, at this moment in my mind, is tangentially connected to where I work. I had the opportunity this spring to spend a month in Florence, Italy, and the food in Florence is very good if you like Italian food, but I went to a restaurant where there's a delightful owner and chef who created a dish that included venison, I'm a meat eater, cacao, chocolate with lemon and herbs and a pasta. And in all the years that I've been to Italy, or all the pasta dishes I've ever had, I've never had one with these flavors of chocolate, lemon, herbs. And so talking to him and realizing that he experimented with something so far out of his comfort zone as to bring cacao into a pasta dish just blew my mind. So right now, Juan, I think it's right up there among the best things I've ever had the chance to consume. In terms of advice for somebody who might want to be an explorer, I think you have to be I think you have to be brave in a certain kind of way, in the sense that I don't think the way that Alicia, Ivan, and myself are talking about exploration, it still kind of cuts against the grain with the model of explorer that society has. And so I think for this new generation of explorers to be willing to do that, they have to be brave enough to step outside that mold of the traditional explorer and come up with approaches like Ivan or Alicia that are that they can articulate and understand and get behind, because I'm still not sure, and I really appreciate developing these friendships with all of you, and I really appreciate what the Explorers Club is doing. I think it's seismic, but I'm not quite sure how widespread this vision of the new explorer is yet. And I think that they're going to have to accept that they're going to have to transition through to kind of help normalize this model of the new explorer.
Okay, food. Gosh, tough one. I have to admit, I enjoyed writing about food and where things come from. So you've actually asked us a really tricky question. So I'm gonna have to admit, I'm gonna pick a dish I had. I love aubergines. I've just written a piece about aubergines. It's really because I'm interested in where food comes from, why we eat it, what is it telling us about us, and all these other questions, and where does it come from, and the whole business of ritual and getting together, and how food can actually combine people from different worldviews and bring them together. We may have completely different views, but we'll get together and eat something, and actually that can break the ice. Yeah. So the dish I'm gonna is aubergines. I love aubergines. This dish I had in Beijing, and I can like taste it still. I had it once. I went to visit in 2019, and the dish was on the patio of in the trendiest part of town, and it had ginger and garlic and onion and coriander, which I think are the sort of three best things combined together. They all cut up, and then it was spread. The aubergine was cut lengthwise, and then this paste is put over it and had chili in it, and then it was roasted, and it was just like pure heaven. And you just ate it with chopsticks and peel it off, and it's just like, oh yum. Okay, I'm just like dreaming. Oh, I wish it would happen now. But it was delicious. But your question was like really hard, because I think my next one would be a brigadeiro from Brazil, but that would be the next one. So I could go down, but I will stop, because we'll be here forever. The question, oh, tough, I think tough one. I was thinking that I agree with George a lot about it's going to be really hard to define what is an explorer of the future. I think the person, you've got to be prepared to be a polymath. You've got to be prepared to ask all the questions you don't even want to ask, because I think you're going to have to have incredibly strong ethics about this, what is it you are exploring. I think you've got to be prepared to perhaps follow your hunches in a way and say, well, okay, I have a hunch this might work. I'm just going to go and preliminary look there, and then be prepared to ask people who are other experts. I think we're going to have to, it's going to cross more boundaries. It can be holistic. It's going to cross disciplinary boundaries. And I think it's going to be really tough. But I think we have to sort of refine the vision of where we're going. And, it's not going to be easy. And I think I mean, I've talked to quite a few archaeologists who are like, so you've got to do with the Explorers Club. Why them? What are you exploring? And I'm thinking, we haven't actually explored everything. We still have lots more to explore. And then, but it goes back to that sort of question, where are we going, which George has already elaborated on. So, yeah, it's fun. But above all, remember it's fun. If it's not fun, you're going to get bored, and then we're going to have, we've got problems, we've got holes. I think we have to realize that, and we've got to remember there's diverse voices, and let those voices speak. Yeah. Even though they may challenge your view of what you think, and so you've got to be prepared to sort of pull back that ego, because I think all of us have one, but I think sometimes it may get in the way of what we're looking for.
Ivan, I will please leave us with the last words. Best thing you've ever eaten, and your advice to someone who wants to be an explorer, the future of exploration.
Well, I grew up in a Maya island, so I'm a seafood person.
Nice.
So my special food I have is the conch. I mean, the conch is I like it on what we name ceviche, which is just basically cooked on lime with onions and tomatoes and pepper and cilantro, and it's really good. But it has a way of preparation. It has to be soft. You have to tender it. You have to heat it with a Maya rock to get it tender, so you can eat it and feel this really, really good. I mean, you can get it in a restaurant sometimes, but it is not that good.
Yeah.
You have to have the homemade it, as my father used to do it. And well, we also have from conch a good hot food, what we may call this the escabeche, the conch in escabeche. Wow, it's really good. But I think the secret is to have this tender, rock heated conch.
Has to be a rock. Has to be
a
Maya rock.
A rock. It gotta be a Maya rock.
Yeah.
So limestone.
Nice.
So my advice to future explorers are basically that, I mean, they don't have to think that exploring is just a matter for the elite. I think everybody can explore. I think the secret is never give up. Whatever you want to do, keep doing. Looking in, different institutions we may support you to do, I mean, to get what you want. Never give up. Keep going. We all can do it, not just the elite.
Never give up. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Explorers Club. Welcome and thank you for staying here with us all the way through. Amazing. Thank you to Alicia, George, Ivan. Hopefully we leave you with some inspiration and some motivation for dinner. My name is Juan Martinez Pineda. Until next time,